Good morning, everyone. Bright and early as we talked last time, the fact that you have picked the 7 a.m. class means you are committed. It is an early morning class. It's earlier than honestly most of our people, unless it's a coffee outside of work, even our clients start. So kudos to you guys for achieving and believing today. So we are gonna kick things off, and maybe just to remind you where we came from. Last time we talked a lot about the challenge, right? So making sure you're working on the right problem. And when we talked about this, we really dove into, and I don't remember if you guys remember that picture of the girl that was washing the car, right? So it was understanding the need. It was not that the car needed to be cleaned, right? Or that she needed a stool, because often what we go to are the tactical or the solution, right? It's understanding the need, and the need was to, be appreciated by her parents and do a good job. And the other need was also to reach. So that really helps us shift and shape how we look at solving problems when we focus on the need versus the solution first. So maybe before I move on to that, are there any questions around that? Or Jared, was there anything that you wanted us to touch on that maybe came up since that class?
Well, this is the first time my students have seen me in about 2 weeks, so everyone might be just a little rusty on, getting our brains back in gear for this. But I do remember we had some great discussions even after your class as students, as we were working through just really trying to get our minds off of. We did a little exercise. I think I shared with you guys about the coffee shop, and I showed them a couple pictures of coffee shop and had them, record basically, okay, what's your first gut reaction if you were to jump to a conclusion, and then put that aside. Now, what would be the challenge? And we went through the challenge process just to practice it a little bit. So that was the last time me and the students actually discuss this. So I think that might jog their memories a little bit, the coffee shop challenge exercise that we did. And then that's about where we left it.
Perfect.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Given the subjective nature of kind of looking at the problem and then seeing the need, has that ever caused any problems as far as making assumptions and then maybe pursuing something when it's not actually what the client or what the person really needs?
So it can. A lot of times our work starts out with an assumption, right? So it's us taking a best shot, but usually what we do is we categorize it into three things, right? So we say, and this may be working with the client, right, to define what the challenge is. We usually bucket things into what do we know, what do we think we know, right? So that's kind of where the assumptions come into, and what don't we know. So what do we need to go out, do research, ask questions, and find? Because to your point, we try and base everything off of facts and take out the assumptions out of things, and really stay objective to solving for that true need. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Carlos.
Yeah, no, I think that actually it's a good good call out, Max. I think that I would actually consider as a requirement every time that you come in to this process, there is going to be a level of hunches and assumptions that you're going to be walking in. Remember that there needs to be agility to the process. So actually one of the things that we say is you need to make sure that you move very quickly and you do understand those three different criteria that Jeff just explained. But hunches and assumptions is a step. So you are going to be walking in, making some educated assumptions. Now, the trick to this process is as you start collecting customer feedback in the feedback loops, then those assumptions start becoming either validated or dismissed. So it's okay to walk into this. You just need to have that thought process, walking into the challenge. And Hans, do you remember, we talked about, especially on the challenge side, we said there's going to be a framing and a reframing of a challenge. So the reframing happens as often as it needs to happen in order to, again, take all the insights that course correct what you were solving for. But what you said, for what you're bringing up, I think the most important thing is, yes, there is a chance that you may be working on the wrong thing. In fact, almost 90% of the challenges that we engage are reframed. So I want to, we always say, tell that stat under that lens because we don't want to offend anybody, but it's truly that. So 90% of the challenges that we start working, they get reframed. So now let me restate it with with what you called out. 90% of the challenges are going after something that maybe they shouldn't.
Does that help answer that question, Max?
That does. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions from anyone on the challenge or the need? No? All right, perfect. Well, we're going to move forward and we're going to tackle kind of these next two bubbles today. So the first is learning and the next is idea. So this will maybe dive in a little bit more, and to your point, Max, about how moving assumptions or the value of customer feedback can help eliminate, working on the wrong need, or I believe we had mentioned it, de-risking the risk that someone may take when solving a challenge, right? So we'll move into the first one, which is learn. So make sure you're not building it alone, but that you're actually learning from people, from customer feedback, from involving who you think your best customer is. And sometimes we actually find we find really great insights from our best customers. We also find really great insights from people who are not our best customer. And while that sounds like, yeah, that would make sense, it's really good to identify who your best customer is, but it's really good to identify who your best customer is not, because as you're building a solution, they're going to be able to add to the things that they wouldn't have, or that they would see as maybe a blind spot, right? That your best customer may be in love with. Anything you wanted to add to that, Carlos?
Nope.
Feedback loops. Yep. Feedback loops is what's important. So I'm going to show a slide. We kind of joke about it, but we'll take 30 seconds, just consume the slide, and then we'll talk about it. And there's not much here, but okay. So can anyone tell me what has happened here? Or maybe take a stab at the confusion that would have happened in the marketplace.
I think I've got you.
All right.
So both of the containers are for very different things. One is insect killer, the other one's cooking spray, but they're designed to look the same.
This is correct. Spot on. So this is a company who, because of brand standards, and much to your point, designed their products to look the same, right? They have the same black and gold logo, literally black and gold. They have the same yellow can. They really, I mean, they're both a spray can even, but you're right, they're for two different things. So this would be something, and how simple it would have been that if they would have placed these two products side by side and put them in front of a customer, how within 30 seconds you were already able to identify that, hey, these look really similar. They're for two completely different things. One may kill you if you use it for cooking. And I don't think that would be good. It would cause confusion in the marketplace. So Carlos, what was how much was lost on this for this particular engagement?
So taking this out of market, because this was already deployed, it cost almost $1.8 million. So it was a $1.8 million mistake. And maybe the other thing to bring forward here is, Customer feedback loops would have been ideal, meaning go to your customer base and then ask for feedback. But even employee feedback would have been appreciated, right? This was done so close to their vests and so stuck into the process of making the product and following standards that they forgot something. I mean, the oversight was so obvious. So, needless to say, the head of marketing didn't survive this, but it's something that went out, and it created that confusion in the aisles. And not because it was, I also want to make sure that we tell the complete story. It wasn't necessarily that they were doing the right thing when they pulled it out. It's because they had such a huge exposure to the litigation that they pulled it out.
So, as far as when we talk about customer feedback loops, we talked a little bit about it in the challenge section. We'll dive more into it right now with the learn phase, but it's extremely important to design them. And we keep saying that, right? So what is a customer feedback loop? Well, customer feedback loops can look, I don't know, like hundreds of different things. We deployed tactics that could potentially just be like this, right? It's, you maybe make a design and you hold up the two photos and start to gain literally just feedback from people that you intersect. It could be you're sitting in a coffee shop and someone's sitting next to you, and I don't know, maybe they're just literally sitting and you're like, hey, do you have 20 seconds? I'm working on something. I would just love someone's perspective and feedback. You intersect them, they provide you feedback, right? So that's one insight that you've gained, and or one interaction, you may gain multiple insights out of that. And that seems, again, like a common sense approach to solving a challenge, but I would say 95%, if not higher, I don't know if you would agree, Carlos, that step doesn't happen. And even from as simple as a coffee shop conversation.
Yeah. So Max, this would be an example of, something that would have been even treated as a known, but it was literally an assumption made saying, hey, you know what? We assume that having a very consistent brand look is the best thing for the company. The answer was no.
Kraus, do you want to talk a little bit more about just other potential feedback loops, or even kind of further the power of them?
Yeah. So again, think about, when we say feedback loop, that's obviously leveraging the big word technique name that sort of resembles what this is. But you remember when we started and we presented what human-centered design is all about. Again, this is the bread and butter of this technique, which again, the big words are customer feedback loops, but in reality is make sure that you build it with the perspective of those who you're trying to solve for. So the rule goes back to the moment that you have time and opportunity to just present either as early as your problem statement, your how might we, your challenge, or the approach that is going to be taken, actually even the study or the framework of what what you think and what you don't know. The sooner that you start sharing this with consumers, with your target audience, and I'm going to highlight one more time, or ideally your best customer, the more direction your path is going to take, and the more de-risking you're going to do when solving for a challenge. So again, leveraging every time that we engage, 90% have to do a reframe. They do a reframe because it's being it's being course corrected by those who have an opinion about the things that you're doing. In this case, the level of complexity, I think that one thing that we also found out is sometimes there's this myth or assumption that when we say customer feedback loops, again, it's a very elaborate approach where you have to create a lot of steps beforehand. And true, I mean, as you get in deeper in the process, you may want to have a conversation guide. You know, you may want to have just a game plan, and even more so if you're going to be leveraging some sort of props to get you know, some of the feedback loops. And maybe I'll get into that a little bit. But my point being is having a conversation doesn't cost anything, and you don't have to have a structure. Some of the stories that we tell people as, you know, sort of like fun and smart ways of doing this, and now that we're referencing coffee shops, one of the techniques that it's highly leveraged, it's literally when you call the, you know, pay it forward in line of a coffee shop. And truly that's exactly what it means. If you think that your audience resides in a coffee shop, I don't know, invest $50, go to the, you know, be in the line, and as you're in the line, turn around and say, I've got $50, coffee's on me. If you're willing to give me 5 minutes, I've got a question to ask. So that's one way that you can actually get, so creative ways like that, you have the ability to engage customers and just get the feedback. Now, let me give some ideas on how you can actually have fun again with engaging customers. Typically, when you're going to have a conversation, and actually, let's say a conversation like this, try to create visual cues, visual provocations that make the experience just a tad funner for the person, and especially if your topic is something fun, right? I'm going to give an example right now where you could say, you could add to this slide and put, you know, A to the left and B to the right. And then even if I have engaged you for only 5 minutes, and I'm like literally saying you, how could I expedite this process? It would be, okay, now that I've got everybody on camera, I have one question for you. Out of this, you know, tell me if you find something wrong. You know, please raise your hand if you think that there's something wrong. Then I can start, and so I can start capturing feedback very quickly just by raise of hands. I can also say, okay, just by a quick show of hands, which one would you put in your, I don't know, cooking aisle or barbecue aisle, A or B? So making it entertaining is something that is going to help quite a bit. And then the other one is use space. So here's an important one, an example that obviously it works mostly when you're in person, but spatial feedback gives you quite a bit to continue a conversation. And one of the techniques that we use very often, it's called just the creative differences. So what this means is think of yourself that you're actually in our space, and you've obviously all been introduced to the garage. Think that we're putting the left picture on one side of one board, and then the right picture on the other side of the board. And we're going to literally draw a line between them. So the question to the group that I want to survey is, position yourself to the product that you most align with, and proximity does count, meaning you can stand right underneath, the fly and insect killer, or you can be close to it, or you can be right in the middle, or you can be completely on the other side. This instruction gives you so much wealth of information, because then you have so many follow-ups to give, right? Again, and think of all the scenarios that could present itself, where you say, okay, Jared, why are you in the middle? Why can't you make up your mind? And then you have his position, and then you have the ability to, call out to two other participants that are in complete extremes and say, help me explain, Jared, why your side is more beneficial than the other. So there are very, spatial feedback structures are incredibly beneficial when you're creating feedback loops, opposed to, and so this is where I wanted to end, a survey. Surveys are so inefficient nowadays because everybody is literally an expert in filling them out. And the motive in filling them out most of the times is, I want to get this done now. So I want to flip through it. I want to, actually, I don't know how many you guys do, but, especially when you're, think about it. When you have expected service, actually, let's do a little test right now. How many of you enjoy to have asked if you can take a quick survey after you have been provided a service that is not really blowing your mind, but it was okay. But how many of you are like jumping up and down and saying, yes, you know, this is amazing. I get to, because it really didn't trigger anything, right? And by the way, I mean, say if you think otherwise, because you could help us, you know, correct an assumption that we're doing based on, you know, some of the observation. But that's truly what happens. It's, you know, it's so overused that it's literally like when you get those, again, and I'm sorry to say this, you know, in the structure, Jared, you know, I hope that I don't offend you or anybody in the academic world, but sometimes you get presented with, you have to watch this video or you have to do this, but what do? You're clicking through it, right? You're just, okay, just go. Okay, yep, this one, A, there, B, 5, everything's 5, everything's amazing. And then when you get to the box of, would you have anything else to add, you sort of skip that. So surveys are the least effective ways of like capturing true feedback loops, because you don't put people in the middle of the decision making that they're truly doing, right? And again, to give you examples where you could say, you know, is this actually, let's go to coffee. No, right? How much do you value coffee? And this is something that we've done before. So how much do you value coffee? I mean, would you take the, you know, do you want to take the journey to go to the coffee shop that gives you the true flavor that you're looking for, or are you just looking for caffeine? Go to your extreme. You know, where are you going? But this helps the one who's problem solving really get into the mindset of the consumer and how they appreciate, first of all, the solution you're providing, because at the end of the day, I'm providing coffee, but then, you know, the perception around the value. So anyway, I'll stop. Does anybody have any questions?
I do have one question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I know that you talked about getting feedback from some of your best customers, and those are a little easier to point out just because they're so regular and oftentimes they engage and interact with you. But how do you reach out to those who are probably on the other side of the spectrum, who are probably your biggest complainers, but they still are partaking in the business? They are still coming in, either taking some of your products or your services, but you want to better satisfy them and get some feedback from them. How do you point out who those people are?
So is it to identify those people, or is it question, or like how to ask those people?
How to identify those people?
Gotcha.
Behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, behavior is what gets you to there. So again, let's obviously we're gonna need an example for this one. I'm gonna keep piggybacking on the coffee. So you have somebody who wants coffee shop coffee versus Nescafe, right? So where are you gonna find each one? You know, based on the behavior. Well, you're gonna find one. You're gonna find at coffee shops, and that's gonna be the easiest one for you to do, right? You're just gonna intersect people as they're making the line on getting their preferred coffee. The other one, you're probably going to have to go to Hy-Vee and wait in the coffee section and intersect people as they're making their choice on getting their, you know, their sort of instant coffee option. But behavior, so again, and actually this would be again another good example for you, Max, when you talk about, I mean, how much can you take hunches? Some of these things are, you know, they're going to be educated guesses, but you're going to have quite a bit of, you know, assertiveness in how you frame this, right? Right now, if we would be a group, if we would be a design group and we're going after coffee, again, this would be a conversation where we're saying, okay, well, where do we go find the other side? You know, a good educated assumption would be, well, let's just go to, you know, let's go to Hy-Vee. Right, and let's just station ourselves there. And we talk about logistics and obviously complexity, right? It's like, well, let's make sure that we ask, you know, permission that we can do this, tell the purpose, but literally that's where you would do. At the moment that you do that, again, first of all, that hunch will be validated very quickly, right? Because as you're standing there, you have to be very clear and say, you know, when people are getting, you have to start doing the, okay, well, you know, let's say that I engaged you, Jared, and you know, I'm saying, okay, well, Jared, quick question. So are you buying this because you don't typically go to coffee shops? And I would probably get corrected by some of the customers, right? Saying, no, I do. And you know, so then my hunch and assumption would probably be corrected and say, okay, so we assume that people who go and grab instant coffee from the Hy-Vee aisle are not coffee drinkers. That's the first assumption we actually corrected. It's not. But within those conversations, we found 3 profiles. There are those who actually don't like, and they're more for them. Then what would be a next step? Is like, well, go to now let's incorporate gas station coffee. Okay, why? Well, because gas station still provides the economy side, right? You're still getting very cheap coffee, not necessarily the best quality. Now let's engage them. So you see how you start making proof points, and then your assumption starts getting corrected and transformed into insight. And insight is when you've validated, no longer an assumption, but you've got different proof points of true consumers, not you, but true consumers that have directed you to say, and then you have your end statement, right? That you could pretty much formulate and say, the difference between this customer and this customer is that, and then you storytell. Is like, the customer who does not want to go to the coffee shop typically tends to, and then you start filling the blank. It typically tends to, make a routine. And by the way, I'm making this up. Takes to make a routine by getting their coffee in the most cost-effective locations like gas stations that also provide another product that goes very well with their mindset, that is a 25-cent donut. So then you start creating the profile, and then you start having the understanding of why your best customer is your best customer and otherwise.
Does that make sense? How that starts to break down, and you really start to, based on assumptions, create these segments of your market on why people would interact, and then you can ask those specific questions back to specific things. To the coffee point, maybe someone is your best customer and absolutely loves your product. The only reason that they're in Hy-Vee buying it that day is because they really value convenience. So maybe you find that convenience is a theme through all your people, and you're a coffee shop without a drive-through. So this tells you that, hey, we as a coffee shop, all of our best customers highly value efficiency and convenience. Let's invest in a drive-through, because you know what, we would actually generate or capture more market share, because that's what they're really valuing. It's not the coffee, it's the convenience, and that's why they buy it, so they can make it at home.
And by the way, just as a fun fact, things that I didn't know when I started the journey in sort of like the coffee industry, first and foremost is because again, see, what we found is that there's different categories, because coffee is too broad of a category, right? Coffee encompasses too many things, especially in a coffee shop. So the first things we learned is that the true pure coffee drinkers are more male than female. But if you do any of the variations of the coffee that can take place in a coffee shop, once you start adding milk and flavors, it's flipped. It's females. And the other interesting thing that we found is that actually people who go get the coffee at the Hy-Vee aisles, again, don't even necessarily have to be the ones that consume the coffee. They're getting the coffee for somebody else. So all these things start becoming, again, proof points where even from, I can tell you, even from a marketing perspective, it's like, well, so based on that, would you try to put your advertising, if you're a coffee shop, on a grocery store? So, the educated, answer for that one would be no, it's not, because it's such a hit and miss, because you're really not, engaging with your true customer. So you got to find other ways to intersect.
One other thing to touch on this, and so we talked about it in the challenge piece, right, was how you go through an idea and keeping it the minimum viable product, right? Usually you kind of create a concept, but really having this minimum viable product, something that is low investment, that you can start to gain feedback from or just have conversations with. This particular instance on the screen, right? They went through the processes. They had marketing meetings, they had manufacturing meetings, they produced the physical product, it shipped, it went to stores, and that's when feedback started flooding in. Don't ever discredit feedback from literally the moment you have an idea all the way, and it needs to remain a constant all the way through the entire process to when you actually do have a physical product and you're testing something. And I'm using product because it's the easiest to typically gain feedback around right away. But even if you had just designed these in, you know, Illustrator, or a graphic designer made these 2 pictures, you would gain so much feedback and so many quality insights before you ever moved any further. And so for me, if I wanted to go to market with these products, I could pay someone online $50 to come up with 2 designs, and I could start getting tons of feedback. It would have only cost me $50 versus, as Carlos said, we spent $1.8 million and never had a conversation. So just keep those things in mind. And that can be anything, right? If you own a business and you want to rebrand, if you want to bring on a new product, if you want to change your colors, if you want to, I mean, anything really, when you first initially start to think of that and make that initial assumption on, should we do this or are we solving for something, start to involve either your customers or just contributors into the equation. So I'm going to move on to.
I've got a question real quick.
Yeah.
When you have something like that, like we talked about, there's assumptions inherent in this process. How do you manage something where you might be blind to an assumption that you've made?
That's a good question. That does happen. But hopefully through feedback, you eliminate those. But I mean, I think we've had that happen, Carlos. I mean, a couple times, right?
Yeah. So again, actually really good questions, Max. The journey of feedback loops never ends. Meaning you should never stop it. Maybe that's the way that, you know, we should explain it. You should never stop the customer feedback loop. It's, you sort of have to consider this like a dashboard. You do have one thing that allows you to know whether you're not hitting on a very critical, insight. Remember, you start with a challenge, and that's, in a way, that's the most educated assumption on how you think you should be addressing, the challenge in and of itself. But as you progress, you will see that it doesn't feel right. And I know that I'm given an answer that it's more subjective than objective, but the path is not going to feel right. I'm going to give another example, and this is more from it's more from a corporate and industry category perspective. But when I resided in corporate America, one of the challenges that we had, and it was one of these that just didn't feel right, is the individual disability insurance. That's actually the name of the category, right? And that's I don't know if anybody have ever heard of this, but individual disability insurance is actually a product. It's like a life insurance. So there's these categories. And the challenge was, at the very highest level, was we need help because this product is dying, literally, and it continues to die. Meaning, as an industry altogether, the adoption for this option of insurance just keeps dropping down and down and down. So people are less and less interested on it. And that was a challenge from a company perspective, but also from an industry. They were like, we want to know, why is this product no longer relevant? So the path that was taken, took us to so many, sort of go back and forths in understanding the customer of what were their preferences. And again, just to give you examples, we went through the financial life cycle, right? Are we presenting it at the right time? Should we be presenting it at a younger age? Does it matter whether you're married or not? I mean, when do you consider this more? Is it more important when you have dependents on your side? And what about when you become a parent? Or what about if you do have parents? So we tried every single angle, but the answer wasn't clear. We weren't getting the aha moment where you started seeing that your provocations, and remember, we're going to go to idea and concept as well. This is where you get your feedback of the value and caliber of your insights. Because if you get to a concept stage and people aren't reacting, you know, in a very positive form, then somewhere in your journey you did not hit on a very pivotal you know, insight. So going back to the exercise at the end, and after going through many rounds of literally going back to square one and saying, are we tackling this the right way, right? What is it? Believe it or not, the emotional implication that changed it all was when we literally changed the name of the product. So here's more of that story. When you start the conversation, and at any point in time, and it doesn't matter how happy you try to make it, but when you say the words, "Hey Max, now I want to talk to you about individual disability insurance," you cannot help but start picturing yourself disabled. And that's the biggest challenge that this industry has, right? Because again, the term, the product is already so you know, very close to being even morbid, that people don't want to think about that, right? It's not a conversation that you want to have. So actually what we did take a deep dive was actually, again, going back to the, you know, behavioral science. And actually, you know what really helped us get to this assumption that then was validated is, you know, and actually this may be very appropriate for you guys. There is a golden era that takes place when you're a human. And that is that roughly from age 20 to about 33 as an average, you guys are waking up, and you're living this right now. You guys are waking up and you are confronting in the mirror the same person, very little change. So from whatever age you have until potentially 30, 33, when you start showing some of your, you know, wisdom highlights that are called gray hairs, and you start realizing that some things are changing, you guys are seeing the same guy, the same lady in front of that mirror every day, which creates an incorrect assumption that is time is not going by. And that is a subconscious thing that you guys are gonna, and again, I'm not sure how much home I'm hitting right now, but that is something that is subconsciously going through your minds, because everything's changing but you. So when provocations or offers that have to do with age are presented to a younger demographic, that's why it's so hard to sort of you know, make that concept connection, because anything that I say or that we present from a marketing perspective, it's not hitting home because you're not feeling that. You can't resonate with the fact that you are growing old, that you are aging, that time is happening. So time and horizon at that age is actually sometimes hard to keep at the forefront, because again, but there's not, by the way, there's nothing wrong that you guys are doing. It's actually part of the magic of being young. But that's actually a weakness that happens with your brain. Your brain takes that as it is not important because you're not tracking any movement, if you will. So when we took that whole psychology into, well, actually that makes sense. If we keep, you know, presenting, regardless, again, like I said, even if we put it in a golden box, but as soon as they unbox that, they have to realize that what we're saying is that, and by the way, you know, the industry is a very aggressive, you know, on your face, you know, pointing the finger at you sort of industry, where it says 1 out of every 4 will eventually need, you know, will be disabled. I mean, those are fear tactics. We're like, it doesn't matter if you put it in the golden box. People are not going to want to talk about that. People are not going to want to look at themselves. And again, you know, stand up in the mirror and try to see what a disabled you may look like. It doesn't happen. So, and then now to finish the story, once we flipped the name of the product, and in a way, actually, so we tricked the mind and we said, you know, this is, and actually the name of the product was a rebuild insurance product, personal rebuild insurance product. Again, if you think about it, I mean, actually think about it, it's exactly the same thing, because individual disability insurance means, or the technique behind it is, if you're ever disabled, this insurance kicks in the rebuild process, right? And when I say rebuild, it could be very, you know, again, very even close to that morbid side of it. But if you need to learn how to walk, if you're, you know, going through PTSD, anything that got you to the point of being disabled, you know, a severe illness, your recovery is what helps this insurance. But again, nobody, going back to it, nobody wants to think of themselves as disabled. But when you flip it and you say it's going to help you rebuild, get on your feet, it's going to help you get back to, you're no longer talking about the bad side of what happened. You're talking about the effort that will take you to get back. So the moment it was flipped, the adoption and conversation changed dramatically, and the appreciation of the product changed dramatically. So going back to your question, Max, that's when you felt the difference in the approach, and you said, okay, hold on. Now we really have something, because we have a very significant before and after of the behavior that we were trying to solve for. But if you have just, minimal, or just, how can you say, just, I would just say that, just minimal or gradual movement, then your insights may not be that powerful for you to make a true change, again, in whether you're solving for a go-to-market strategy, repackaging, creating a new product. It's not that big. It's just an incremental shift in behavior. So it does take time, but I don't know if we've shared this with you. We always say, because a lot of people ask us, is they say, so in order to be a good practitioner, do you need to know, the ins and outs of design thinking and all the techniques? Maybe, I mean, the obvious answer is yes, but we always have the feeling that if, first of all, if this process ever intrigues you, piques your interest, doing it over and over again is what gets you good at the process. But what gets you good at the outcome is, there's one thing that, Jeff and I truly believe. The true trick of being good at this is if you have the ability to fall in love with a challenge, not a solution. And you may have heard me say this before, but that's truly the trick. Because if you truly have that skill, the skill that says, you know what, I really, really enjoy this challenge, that's when my subjective answer of you, Max, when I said it doesn't feel right, that's when it all comes together, right? Because if you're so much, invested in the challenge, you will not give up until you sort of get it right for both the business or client that you're solving for and the customer who you're designing for. So you keep going until you really get it right. But that process only happens if you really like what you're solving for. So that's why we always use that phrase. If you have the ability to fall in love with the challenge, then you're going to be really good at this. If not, you may actually have a battle with this, because there's going to be so many steps for something that you may see obvious. And we actually see those behaviors. And by the way, we wouldn't be offended. And if you're feeling that, it's perfectly okay. Maybe that's a sign that you don't like this. But a lot of people, when they see this process and their feedback is, well, you know what, we sort of already knew that. That's a flag for us that says this is not really meant for you, because you see this as obvious steps for an obvious process, meaning you already want to have or think of a solution that's already there. So you never want to give yourself that time to just, dream. And even if there is a solution, again, remember we said design thinking should allow you that time that allows you to dream. Because and hence, and now we're getting maybe to another extreme. This is why it's heavily used in innovation, because if you really put any challenge, any current solution through the design thinking, even if it's working flawlessly, what you're really opening up the doors to be is to innovate current solution, meaning, really dump everything dump everything that you do in the hopes of creating a new way of doing and providing the solution that you have.
And so I know so we spend a lot of time on the learning phase because feedback's so important, as we've talked about, and hopefully it's conveyed. I'm just going to go through the idea phase. And again, so this is again where we talk about starting with low resolution, but these dashed lines are things to remember that as you go through the process, it really represents feedback, and feedback again should be throughout the process. So if we look at this slide, this is where most people need to start, right? It is truly having a concept, moving that to an MVP or a minimum viable product, and then moving that to an MMP, which is a minimum marketable product. And everywhere that you see, like, I guess I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's an arrow that points between them, right? Those are points in which you would be gaining feedback to help evolve your idea to the next step. Again, we talk about time related to feedback. So if you look at the concept, the very first slide, and I showed this to one of you, you would be a lot more likely, and this is true, it's behavioral, right? It's how humans work. If I set this in front of you and gave you a pen, you would be a lot more likely to give me feedback, because it would be very easy to intersect my idea, right? You could take a red pen and just circle some things that you didn't like, because when you see this, it doesn't necessarily look like I have put a lot of time and effort into this. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you look at the MMP, and I showed you this on my phone, and it was already built, it had these pictures in it, it had functions and features, and said, can you give me feedback? You're not necessarily going to give me as much feedback or as good of feedback, because you're going to say, wow, this is really nice. You must have spent a lot of time on this, so I don't want to hurt your feelings. You must have, this must have cost a lot of money to get to this point. So it looks good, right? So there's a ton of value in this process of when you actually start to create something, of gaining feedback throughout the process, but also starting with something that's so easy to change and manipulate. Because if we didn't like, I don't know, if we're looking at that first picture, right, of the concept, we didn't like that the face was on the left and the star and the arrow were on the right, and we wanted to flip those. We could do that by just redrawing it. If you kept working and never really revisited your product and went all the way to the far end, maybe it cost you 10 grand to have a programmer go through and change all the settings so that you want to flip where the picture is and where the arrow is. Anything to add to that, Carlos?
No, actually, bottom line, and this one is, you're going to gain more, the more instructional and design value, you're going to find it in the concept versus the MMP. I mean, actually think about it. If you guys look at the MMP, image right now, maybe some, you can make out of what could this industry be, but at the end of the day, you're going to be reacting to things that you're already used to, and you may actually even provide a good score based on that, right? Because you got a little bit of that chat bubble, and you have number 2 and number 1, so that's sort of like a notification. So there are things that you're so used to. So we're going to start getting good positive feedback, but the number one question is, what's this for, right? Why would I even install it on my phone? And so that's a huge reason why we say the most valuable feedback you're going to get is going to be when you put it in pen and paper versus something that has any type of resolution in it. The moment that you put resolution in it, people are going to be graceful with you. And again, and actually at the end of the day, that hurts your design. That would be another example where I would tell you, Max, be careful that your feedback never starts, in order to avoid what you said, right? What if you get into this? Don't ever start with a high resolution provocation or conversation, because that's going to take away quite a bit of the opportunities of getting true insights that redirect your challenge. I want to be respectful of the time, Jared and everybody, but we're more than welcome to answer a few more questions if you guys want to stick around.
Yeah, so this that's really for today. A lot of it again is customer feedback. It's so important. We can't preach it enough. It's through the entire process. And as Carlos alluded to, never build anything alone. So if you want to actually activate a market, connect with a product, service, or experience that you want to offer, definitely include feedback from both extremes of customers, who your best is, and learn from who isn't your best customer. Any questions? Maybe we'll spend a couple minutes on if anybody does have anything, or specifically around what we just talked about.
I know that a few of the students might have to actually head towards campus if they're Zooming from home. So if you guys have to drop out, it's okay. I am recording this and I'm going to upload it as a YouTube later. So if you missed this last little bit, it's all right. I was going to ask one question. When it comes to just recognizing the fact that going back to that question someone asked earlier about blindness towards your own bias, and then how feedback will help kind of protect you from making things that just seem brilliant to you but might not actually be where you need to be. Do you guys ever, are there any like basic rules or anything that that you have to kind of put on the table from day one when you're working on coming up with ideas? Like, for example, you recognize that everyone's prone to that internal bias. So do you guys actually have a formal process when you're working with a client? You lay out, you say, here's the ground rules. These are the things we know are true. This is going to happen. You're going to have bias, this. Do you guys have like a little system, or is it more organic? You just kind of work through it the way you're working through it with the class right now?
I would say it's, so the formality that happens in that process is kind of what you alluded to. There's, I would say, quote unquote, house rules when we engage into a challenge, right? One of the biggest things, and Carlos even said it, but it is kind of a mantra, is you have to fall in love with the challenge, not the solution. But along with that, what happens is no one can ever own an idea, right? So let's say we wanted to solve a complex challenge for the college, right? We would invite the college to sit at the table, and I'm saying invite, not a physical person, but the business as itself would sit at the table. And as we design solutions, we're going to look to that seat, right, which would be empty, but it would represent the college, to say, is everything we're working on the best for the college, right? And so that's a whole different mindset, and we explain that from the get-go, but it allows you to frame things in a way in which you don't have bias or you don't have ownership. Because the moment someone starts owning an idea, or they really, really want their idea pushed, that's where you do become blinded. So an effective way to eliminate blindness through problem solving is to never want to own the idea. That's how you allow it to evolve. You allow people to contribute. You allow it to build. I think we've all been part of a group project, and they typically happen this way, right? Hey, go get into your groups. It's you five. You sit down, you think about what you're going to do. You start working on it together as a group of five. You don't really interact with other people. You come up with something. Typically, the group dynamic is someone emerges as a real leader in the group, or maybe not necessarily a leader, but someone who is very aggressive in wanting to be the leader, right? And then a couple people will contribute, and then you'll usually have someone who remains really quiet. Again, it's not necessarily a formal like process, but the rule of engagement for us is everyone's a contributor. But we also do have the conversations around, you know what, everyone's going to get an opportunity. Everyone has to contribute. And it's through creative collaboration that we're actually going to find the best solution. So it's not necessarily this extremely formal process, Jared, but it is truly just having the discussion about how we're going to work together. Because that piece is often missed, whether it be school, whether it be work, whether, you know, whatever it is, it's missed on. No one ever really explains how you have to work together. No one sets up the rules of engagement for one person to help another. Is that,
are your clients usually pretty good about relinquishing that control? Like whoever paid to bring you in?
no?
You know, a lot of times bosses, you know, they're used to being the bus driver, right? So they're like, everyone get on. I know where we're going. We have a guest speaker. You know, we'll come up with a solution. You guys have to overcome a lot with that.
Yep. So typically, yeah, every day. So typically the way that it flushes itself out very fast and effectively is we'll allow them to own the idea until we go to the first time to get customer feedback. Because again, that's not our assumptions, right? Well, it's kind of formulated on an assumption, but it's not our feedback. Their customers literally telling them what they would like or don't like. And if it's something that maybe, and I'm going to say offend lightly, but let's say the business leader wants to create a cup that's 12 inches tall, and he loves it. And everyone's like, no, it should only be 6 inches tall. that's nothing we did, but as soon as that first customer intersect happens and insights come back, it typically starts to level out the playing field because they understand the value of their customers' feedback, and we're just facilitating a process. We joke about it, but we don't get hired or paid to argue with people. Usually what happens is through customer engagement, the level setting occurs.
Good.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you really want to put it as, actually to go back, I think the structure is what you have in front of you, right? The stages, that would be the structure that you go through. And we never miss or bypass a step in that process. I think that from the rules of engagement, actually, ironically, in every single stage, you're going to have different sets of rules of engagement, but for the overall design thinking process and having the ability to have the right mindset, and maybe I would reframe it then, Jared, too. It's not necessarily that we focus our time in a sort of I don't know, actually the rules of how this is going to work best. We actually focus quite a bit on the profile of those who need to be involved in the journey. And that's where you've already heard us say some of these things. But if I would have to like maybe count them and, what is the right profile is, again, first and foremost, you need to know that you're going to be in an environment where creative collaboration drives the process. So then ask the question, can you handle that? Right? We're going to live in a process where the attitude is yes and. So it's a build up, build in mentality. We're gonna engage in a process that says you need to fall in love with the challenge, not the solution, and then you can go again take a deep dive on that. And then I think the other one is we are going to engage a process that sort of acknowledges that reality is never wrong. So the moment that you set those there as like the backbone of what we're going to be doing, I think that that's what probably would sustain the structure, the rules of engagement that, again, hopefully gets you the right mindset that avoids a lot of the things that we talked about.
Excellent. Thanks. I would love to be a fly on the wall for one of those types of meetings where you have someone, maybe you have a client that isn't there yet, but you give them those stipulations you just listed and then kind of see the transformation, especially after they get that first bit of feedback. So yeah, that's great.
And by the way, some clients actually don't make it. I mean, they can't handle the journey, Jared, like literally. It's and sometimes that happens when the first feedback comes in. So yeah, actually sometimes being on that room isn't really that comfortable because it's you just can't go past that stage.
Yeah, people are too in love with
exactly
their preconceived idea. Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Yep.
So, well,
anything else, guys? Well, this was cool.
Thank you all for being so flexible. Sorry we had to do it via Zoom, but I think it worked out just fine.
Yeah,
I think so too.
Hopefully we can end in person, but if not, we can run through Zoom again. I know Zoom burnout's a real thing, so to see you guys in person, it's a lot better, I think, for everyone than feel like you're on the spotlight of a little screen.
Even if